in a room full of wolves, the most dangerous creature isn't the one baring its teeth. It's the one standing perfectly still. When 3 armed men stormed the exclusive Onyx Lounge in downtown Chicago, the world stopped. Billionaires screamed, politicians hid under tables, and bodyguards panicked. But one camera angle caught something that baffled the FBI and terrified the Mafia. In the middle of the chaos, a 24-year-old waitress named Leo Vance didn't flinch. She didn't drop her tray. She didn't scream. She checked her watch. This is the story of how a simple waitress stunned the underworld, and why Julian Moretti, the city's most ruthless capo, realized too late that the woman serving his whiskey was far more dangerous than the gun on his hip. The Onyx Lounge was the kind of place where the air smelled of old money, mahogany, and secrets. Located on the penthouse floor of the Meridian Tower, it offered a view of the Chicago skyline that only the 1% could afford. Julian Moretti sat in his usual booth, table 9, the corner spot with the tactical advantage. He was 32, wearing a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars. He was the underboss of the Moretti crime family, a man known in the press as a real estate developer and known on the streets as the architect. He didn't just break legs, he dismantled lives with the precision of a surgeon. Tonight he was bored. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his ice-blue eyes scanning the room out of habit. He watched his lieutenant Marcus Vane flirting with a hostess near the entrance. He watched the senator in the corner, sweating through his shirt as he argued with his mistress. And then he watched the waitress. He didn't know her name yet. She was new. Dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, a uniform that was 2 sizes too big, attempting to hide a figure that was athletic and lean. She moved efficiently, almost robotically. No wasted energy. She was pouring a glass of 1982 Chateau Margaux for a table of investment bankers when the elevator doors chimed. It wasn't a soft chime. It was a warning. 3 men burst out. Ski masks, Kevlar vests, automatic rifles modified AR-15s. "Everybody down, now or we paint the walls," the lead gunman screamed, firing a burst into the ceiling. The sound was deafening. The crystal chandelier shattered, raining glass onto the screaming patrons. The chaos was instantaneous. The senator dove under his table, knocking over a candle. The investment bankers shrieked, scrambling over each other like rats in a sinking ship. Even Marcus Julian's seasoned lieutenant flinched his hand, fumbling for the Glock 19, concealed in his jacket. Julian didn't move. He kept his hand on his glass, his eyes narrowing. He was assessing threats, counting exits, calculating the odds. But then movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. The waitress. While the rest of the room dissolved into hysteria, she hadn't moved an inch. She was still standing by the banker's table. The bottle of Chateau Margaux was still in her hand, tilted at a perfect 45-degree angle. She hadn't spilled a drop. Julian watched, mesmerized, as time seemed to slow down. A piece of shattered chandelier glass sliced through the air, heading straight for her face. Without breaking her posture, she tilted her head 2 inches to the left. The shard missed her ear by a millimeter, embedding itself into the wall behind her. It was a movement so subtle, so precise, that if Julian had blinked, he would have missed it. The lead gunman, a hulking man shouting orders, marched toward the center of the room. "Phones and wallets on the floor. Anyone looks at me, they die." The waitress slowly set the wine bottle down on the table. It made no sound. She wasn't shaking. Her breathing, Julian could see the rise and fall of her chest, was rhythmic, controlled, like a sniper before a shot. One of the gunmen, a wired, twitchy amateur, swung his rifle toward her. "You bitch! Get on the ground!" Leo Vance looked at him. She didn't look at the gun. She looked at his eyes. "The safety is on," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden hush of the room, it carried like a bell. The gunman froze. "What? Your safety?" She repeated, her tone bored, like she was explaining a menu item. "The lever on the side. It's engaged. If you pull that trigger, nothing happens, and my manager will tackle you before you figure it out." The gunman panicked. He looked down at his weapon. In that split second of distraction, the dynamic of the room shifted. Marcus, seeing the opening, drew his weapon and fired 2 clean shots. The twitchy gunman dropped. The other 2 turned, but Julian was already moving. He stood up, smooth and lethal, firing 3 rounds from the pistol he'd drawn from his ankle holster. The robbery was over in 10 seconds. Bodies lay on the plush carpet. Smoke drifted in the air. The screams started up again, louder this time. But Julian wasn't looking at the bodies. He was walking toward the waitress. She was checking the wine bottle for cracks. "You," Julian said, his voice a low growl that usually made grown men tremble. Leo Vance looked up. Her eyes were dark, devoid of fear, filled with an exhaustion that felt centuries old. "Mr. Moretti, you'll have to wait on a refill. The bar is closed due to—" She gestured vaguely at the corpse near her feet. "Circumstances." "You noticed the safety," Julian said, stepping into her personal space. "How?" She shrugged, pulling a rag from her apron to wipe a speck of blood off the table. "Lucky guess." "There is no luck in this room," Julian countered. "Who are you?" "Just a waitress, sir." Julian grabbed her wrist. Her pulse was steady, slow, resting rate of maybe 60 beats per minute, just seconds after a shootout. "Bullshit," he whispered. "Nobody stays that calm unless they've seen worse." Leo pulled her hand away, her grip surprisingly firm. "If you'll excuse me, sir, I have to go get a broom. There's a lot of glass." She walked away, stepping over the dead gunman as casually as if he were a pile of laundry. Julian watched her go, a cold thrill racing down his spine. He had enemies everywhere. Russians, the feds, the triads. But for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about war. He was thinking about the waitress who didn't blink. 3 hours later, the Onyx Lounge was a crime scene. Yellow tape crisscrossed the entrance. Flashing red and blue lights from police cruisers washed over the faces of the traumatized elite standing on the sidewalk. Detective Frank Harrison of the Chicago PD was chewing a toothpick, looking tired. He knew better than to question Julian Moretti too aggressively. The Moretti family had lawyers who cost more than the police department's annual budget. "Self-defense, Mr. Moretti. Clear cut." Harrison grunted, closing his notepad. "Your permit is valid. The gunman aimed, you fired. We'll need a formal statement downtown tomorrow, but you're free to go." "Good," Julian said, adjusting his cufflinks. He hadn't left the scene. He was waiting. He watched as the police interviewed the staff. Most of the waitresses were crying, wrapped in shock blankets. The manager was hyperventilating. And then there was Leo. She was sitting on the back of an ambulance bumper, not because she was hurt, but because a paramedic had insisted. She was eating a granola bar. Julian signaled to Marcus. "Bring the car around, and get me everything on her. Name, address, history. I want to know what she had for breakfast in 3rd grade." "The waitress?" Marcus asked, confused. "Boss, she's just a civvy with ice in her veins. Maybe she's on meds." "Meds make you slow." "She was fast," Julian corrected. "Do it." Julian walked over to the ambulance. The paramedic stepped aside as the Don of Chicago approached. "Miss Vance," Julian said. Leo stopped chewing. She swallowed, dusting crumbs off her apron. "Mr. Moretti, did you need a witness statement? I already told the officer that you saved the day. Very heroic." Her voice was flat. Sarcastic. No, it was guarded. "I don't care about the police," Julian said, leaning against the ambulance door. "I want to know where you learned to identify the safety mechanism on a modified AR-15 from 20 feet away." "Video games," she lied smoothly. "Call of Duty is very realistic these days." Julian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I play chess, Ms. Vance. I know when I'm being hustled. You tilted your head to avoid a glass shard before it even broke. You knew the trajectory." Leo's eyes hardened. For a second, the mask slipped. The tired waitress vanished, replaced by something sharp and predatory. "You have a vivid imagination, Mr. Moretti. Maybe you should write screenplays instead of running. Whatever it is you run." "I run this city," Julian said softly, "and I don't like mysteries in my city. I'm not a mystery. I'm a broke college dropout trying to pay rent. Now, if you don't mind, my shift is over." She hopped off the bumper, grabbing her cheap tote bag. "I'm driving you home," Julian stated. It wasn't an offer. "I'll take the bus." "The bus doesn't run at 200 a.m. in this district, and the remaining partners of those 3 men inside might be waiting to see who walks out of here. You're a material witness." Julian opened the door of the black armored SUV that had just pulled up. "Get in, or I tell Detective Harrison to run your fingerprints through the international database, and something tells me, Leo, that you really don't want your prints in a system." She froze. Her hand tightened on the strap of her bag. Julian had bluffed. He had no idea if she was hiding from the law, but her reaction confirmed it. A micro-expression of panic instantly suppressed. She walked past him and climbed into the leather interior of the SUV. The drive was silent. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows. Julian sat opposite her, pouring a drink from the car's console. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Drop me at the corner of 5th and Main," Leo said quickly. "That's a commercial district. Nobody lives there," Julian noted. "I like to walk the last few blocks." "Paranoid?" Julian mused. "Tactical. You don't want me to know where you sleep." Leo turned to look at him. In the dim light of the car, she looked strikingly beautiful. But it was a dangerous beauty. Sharp edges and hidden depths. "In my experience, Mr. Moretti, men like you are more dangerous than the men who robbed the club." "Men like me? Predators," she said simply. "You see something you don't understand, and you have to own it or break it." Julian leaned forward, the scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder filling the space between them. "And which one do you think I want to do to you?" Leo held his gaze. "I think you want to figure out why a waitress knows that you carry a Sig Sauer P226 on your ankle, favoring your left leg because of an old injury." Julian stiffened. He hadn't told anyone about the knee injury from 5 years ago, and his pant leg had been down the entire night. "How?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You walk heavy on the right," she murmured, "and when you sat down, you adjusted the left cuff just enough to clear the holster grip. Muscle memory." The car came to a stop at 5th and Main. Leo opened the door before the driver could assist. She stepped out into the cold Chicago wind. "Thanks for the ride," she said. "Leo," Julian called out. She paused on the sidewalk. "You're fired from the Onyx Lounge." She didn't look surprised. "Okay. You start tomorrow as my personal head of hospitality. double the salary. You report to my estate at 8 Asuru a.m. I'm not interested in working for the Mafia, she said. It's not a request, Julian said, his eyes locking onto hers. Because if you don't show up, I really will run those fingerprints. And whoever you're hiding from, I'll find them too. He closed the door. As the SUV pulled away, Julian watched her through the rear-view camera. She stood alone on the corner, looking small against the towering buildings. But as the car turned the corner, he saw her reach into her tote bag. She didn't pull out a phone. She pulled out a burner SIM card, snapped it in half, and dropped it into a sewer grate. Julian smiled. "Marcus," he said into the intercom, "cancel my meetings for tomorrow. I have a puzzle to solve." The Moretti estate was not just a home. It was a fortress disguised as a Tuscan villa on the outskirts of Chicago. 12-foot walls topped with electrified fencing motion sensors, hidden in the perfectly manicured hedges, and armed guards patrolling the perimeter in suits that cost more than Leo's entire wardrobe. Leo Vance arrived at the front gate at 7:59 a.m. She wore a simple black blouse and slacks, utilitarian, professional, invisible. The guard at the gate checked her ID, his eyes lingering on her face. He patted her down, checking for wires, weapons, or recording devices. Leo stood perfectly still. Her arms raised, her face a mask of indifference. She knew this routine. She had done it 1,000 times before, usually on the other side of the world, usually before entering a room to kill someone. "You're clear," the guard grunted, the gate buzzing open. She walked up the long gravel driveway. The gravel was noisy, intentional landscaping designed to alert residents of approaching footsteps. Smart, she thought. Julian is paranoid. Good. Julian was waiting for her in the library, a massive room lined with first-edition books and smelling of cedar and espresso. He was standing by the window watching her approach. "You're on time," Julian said without turning around as she entered. "Punctuality is a virtue of the board," Leo replied, stopping in the center of the room. "What is my job, Mr. Moretti?" "You said hospitality, but we both know you don't need someone to fluff pillows." Julian turned. The morning light caught the sharp angles of his face. He looked tired, but his eyes were alert, burning with that same intense curiosity from the night before. "I have a meeting at noon," Julian said, walking to his desk and picking up a file. "Dante Russo, the head of the Russo family. We are negotiating a truce regarding the harbor shipments. Dante is old school. He doesn't trust technology, he doesn't trust lawyers, and he definitely doesn't trust me. And I'm supposed to do what, serve coffee and look pretty. I need a second pair of eyes," Julian said, tossing the file onto the desk. "You noticed a safety catch on a rifle from 20 feet away in a dark club. I want you in the room. I want you to watch him. Watch his bodyguards. Tell me what they aren't saying." Leo hesitated. Being in a room with 2 Mafia dons was suicide, if she was recognized. "If I do this," Leo said slowly, "you stop digging into my past. You delete whatever file Marcus is trying to build right now, and after a month I walk away with my severance pay." Julian smiled a wolfish grin. "1 month. Deal." The meeting took place in the sunroom. Dante Russo was a heavy-set man in his 60s, smelling of cigar smoke and garlic. He brought 4 bodyguards. Julian had Marcus and 2 others. Leo moved through the room like a ghost. She poured water, offered espresso, and cleared ashtrays. She kept her head down, but her eyes were everywhere. She watched Dante's hands. He was tapping his ring against the glass table. Morse code. No, just a nervous tick. She watched his bodyguards. 3 of them were standard, muscle-bulky, slow, scanning the room poorly. But the 4th bodyguard stood in the back corner. He was younger, wiry. He wasn't watching the room. He was watching Julian's throat. He wasn't blinking. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his hand hovering near his appendix carry. Assassin Leo's mind screamed. Not a bodyguard, a hitter. The negotiation was going poorly. "You're squeezing me, Julian," Dante growled, slamming his hand on the table. "The unions are my territory. You stick to the real estate, I keep the docks. That was the agreement with your father." "My father is dead," Julian said calmly, sipping his espresso. "And the docks are hemorrhaging money. I'm offering to modernize your operation, Dante. Take the deal." "I don't need your charity," Dante shouted. Leo stepped forward to refill Dante's water glass. As she leaned in, she intentionally tripped just a fraction, spilling a few drops of water onto the table near Dante's phone. "You clumsy bitch!" Dante roared, standing up and backhanding the air near her face. Leo flinched dramatically, dropping the pitcher. It shattered. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry." Julian stood up, his face dark with fury. "Don't touch my staff, Dante. Teach them how to walk, then." In the chaos of the shouting and the cleaning up, Leo knelt on the floor to pick up the glass shards. As she did, she looked up at Julian. She caught his eye. She tapped her own throat, then glanced at the wiry bodyguard in the corner. Then she tapped her wrist. "Time." Julian paused. He saw the signal. He looked at the bodyguard. The man had shifted his weight forward on the balls of his feet. He was prepping to lunge. Julian sat back down, his demeanor instantly changing from aggressive to relaxed. He laughed. "You know what, Dante?" "You're right," Julian said, throwing his hands up. "I'm pushing too hard. Let's take a break. Lunch. I have a chef who makes a risotto that will make you cry." The tension broke. Dante looked confused but mollified. "Risotto fine, but we talk numbers after." The hitter in the corner relaxed, stepping back on his heels. The window of opportunity had closed. 10 minutes later in the hallway, Julian pinned Leo against the wall. His grip was hard but not painful. "What did you see?" he hissed. "The guy in the grey suit," Leo whispered, her breath hitching. "He had a ceramic knife taped to his forearm inside the sleeve. I saw the outline when he shifted. He was waiting for a signal. When Dante got mad, the guy prepped to strike. He was going to cut your throat before your guards could draw their guns." Julian stared at her. He realized that if she hadn't spilled that water, if she hadn't broken the tension, he would be bleeding out on the sunroom floor right now. "Who are you?" Julian asked again, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Waitresses don't spot concealed ceramic blades." "I told you," Leo said, pushing him away gently. "I have very good eyes, and you have very bad security." She walked away toward the kitchen, her heart hammering in her chest. She had saved him. That was a mistake. She was supposed to be invisible. Now she was indispensable. 2 weeks passed. Leo fell into a rhythm at the estate. She reorganized the pantry, fixed the inventory system, and silently overhauled Julian's personal security protocols without him officially asking. She moved furniture to eliminate blind spots. She changed the rotation of the night guards. Julian noticed all of it. He watched her on the security cameras at night. He saw how she did perimeter checks when she thought no one was looking. He saw how she slept with a chair wedged under her door handle. On a rainy Tuesday, Julian had to inspect a construction site in the South Loop. It was a routine trip. Marcus was driving. 2 support cars followed. "You're coming with me," Julian told Leo as he put on his trench coat. "Why you need someone to hold your umbrella?" Leo asked, looking up from her tablet. "I need my lucky charm. Since you arrived, nobody has tried to kill me for 14 days. That's a record." Leo sighed but grabbed her coat. She had a bad feeling about today. The rain was heavy, reducing visibility. The South Loop was a maze of alleys and unfinished high-rises. Perfect for an ambush. They took the armored Mercedes. Leo sat in the back with Julian. The rain hammered against the roof like bullets. "You seem tense," Julian observed. "We're taking the lower Wacker Drive route," Leo said, looking out the window. "It's a choke point. No signal, limited exits. It's the fastest way. Fastest is rarely safest." As they entered the tunnel, the lights flickered. Traffic was sparse. Ahead of them, a sanitation truck was stalled in the middle lane, blocking the path. "Go around," Marcus said into his radio to the lead car. The lead car moved to bypass the truck. As it passed, the side of the truck exploded. Boom! The sound was earth-shattering. The lead car was flipped into the air, crashing into the concrete pillar. Fire erupted, filling the tunnel with black smoke. "Ambush, reverse, reverse!" Marcus screamed, slamming the Mercedes into reverse. But behind them, a van screeched sideways, blocking the retreat. 4 men jumped out of the van wearing tactical gear and gas masks. They opened fire with automatic rifles. The armored glass of the Mercedes held spiderwebbing under the impact of the bullets. "We're trapped!" Marcus yelled, drawing his gun. "Boss, get down!" Julian grabbed Leo, pulling her toward the floorboard. "Stay down!" Leo didn't stay down. Her eyes were scanning the chaos. The gas masks. They were going to smoke them out. "Tear gas!" Leo shouted, just as a canister smashed through the front windshield, which had been weakened by the gunfire. White smoke filled the cabin instantly. Marcus coughed blindingly, firing through the hole in the glass. He took a bullet to the shoulder and slumped over the center console. "Marcus!" Julian lunged forward, but the smoke was choking him. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't see. The door next to Julian was ripped open. A mercenary dragged Julian out onto the asphalt, throwing him to the ground. Julian kicked, connecting with a knee, but a rifle butt to the temple dazed him. He rolled onto his back, rain and blood mixing on his face. The mercenary stood over him, raising the rifle. "Goodbye, Moretti." Julian stared up at the barrel, waiting for the flash. It didn't come. Instead, a blur of motion launched from the back seat of the car. Leo. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a Valkyrie. She hit the mercenary with the force of a freight train, not tackling him, but striking him. A palm heel strike to the chin that snapped his head back, followed instantly by an elbow to the throat. The mercenary dropped the rifle, gagging. Leo caught the rifle in mid-air before it hit the ground. She rolled over the hood of the car as bullets sparked around her. She was moving with a fluidity that was terrifying to behold. "2 at 6 o'clock!" she screamed, her voice commanding, stripping away any pretense of being a civilian. She fired 2 controlled bursts. Double tap, double tap. 2 mercenaries dropped. Julian scrambled to his feet, grabbing his own gun from the ground. He looked at Leo. She was standing amidst the smoke and the ruin, the oversized assault rifle looking natural in her hands. She checked the mag, cleared the chamber, and scanned the upper level of the tunnel. "Sniper north pillar," she yelled, shoving Julian behind the engine block of the car. A shot rang out, sparking off the pavement exactly where Julian had been standing a second ago. Leo took a breath, leaned out, and fired a single shot at the shadows in the rafters. A body fell from the maintenance catwalk, landing with a sickening thud. Silence returned to the tunnel, save for the crackling of the fire and Marcus's groans from the front seat. Leo lowered the rifle. She was panting, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. She looked at the bodies. 5 men down. She had taken out 4 of them in under 30 seconds. She slowly turned to face Julian. Julian was staring at her. The gun in his hand was forgotten. He looked at the way she held the weapon finger off the trigger stock, tucked tight, scanning her sectors. "Who?" Julian choked out, wiping blood from his eye. "Who are you?" Leo looked at him, and for the first time he saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of the gunmen, but fear of him seeing her, seeing the truth. "We have to move," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "More will be coming. Get Marcus. I'll drive." "Leo, move, Julian!" She screamed a command that brooked no argument. Julian obeyed. He dragged Marcus into the back seat. Leo jumped into the driver's seat, shoving the dead mercenary out of the way. She slammed the car into gear tires, screeching as she navigated through the wreckage, driving like a professional stuntman. As they sped out of the tunnel and into the rain-slicked streets of Chicago, Julian watched the back of her head. He knew. She wasn't just a girl with a hidden past. She wasn't just ex-military. The way she moved, the specific strikes she used Krav Maga mixed with Sistema, the way she handled the rifle. She was a ghost, a legend he had heard whispered about in the underworld, an operative from the program, an elite off-the-books government hit squad that didn't officially exist. She was a weapon worth millions, and she was hiding in his house serving him coffee. Julian touched the bruise on his temple. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, hard realization. He couldn't let her go. Not now. Not ever. But he also knew that if the people who trained her found out where she was, the war that would come to his doorstep would make this ambush look like a playground fight. "Take the exit for the safe house," Julian said quietly. "I know where it is," Leo replied. "Of course you do," he whispered. They drove into the darkness. 2 predators trapped in the same cage, neither sure who was the master and who was the prey. The safe house was a converted industrial loft in the meatpacking district, an unsuspecting brick building with reinforced steel shutters and a private elevator that required a retinal scan. Leo parked the battered Mercedes in the underground garage. The moment the engine died, the silence was deafening. Marcus was groaning in the back seat, his face pale blood soaking through his jacket. "Help me with him," Leo commanded, her voice tight. Julian didn't argue. He wasn't the boss right now. He was a survivor following the alpha in the room. Together they dragged Marcus into the elevator and up to the loft. Inside the space was sparse. Concrete floors, a leather couch, a fully stocked medical bay disguised as a bathroom. Leo guided Marcus to the kitchen table. "Medical kit, now," she ordered. Julian ran to the bathroom, grabbing the trauma bag he kept for emergencies. When he returned, Leo had already cut open Marcus's shirt. She was probing the wound with gloved hands. "Through and through," she muttered. "Missed the artery, shattered the clavicle. He's going to live, but he needs antibiotics and a surgeon to set the bone later." She worked with terrifying efficiency. She cleaned the wound, packed it with gauze, and administered a morphine shot she found in the kit. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes were laser-focused. Julian watched her. He saw the way she anticipated Marcus's pain, steadying him before he could flinch. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a medic. Once Marcus was stabilized and passed out on the couch, Leo walked to the kitchen sink. She turned on the cold water and began scrubbing the blood off her hands. The water turned pink, swirling down the drain. Julian stood in the doorway, the adrenaline finally fading, replaced by a sole ache in his head and a burning question in his chest. "Leo," he said. She didn't turn. She kept scrubbing harder now, as if trying to remove a stain that went deeper than the skin. "Leo," Julian said louder. She shut off the water. She gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles white. "Don't ask me, Julian. If I tell you, I have to leave, and if I leave, you're dead. I'm dead anyway, if I don't know who is sleeping in my house," Julian countered, walking toward her. "You handled an HK-416 rifle like you were born with it. You identified a sniper position in 2 seconds. You saved my life, yes, but you also put a target on my back." Leo turned around. She looked exhausted. The wet hair hung in her face, framing eyes that held a lifetime of violence. "My name isn't Leo Vance," she whispered. Julian stopped 3 feet away from her. "Then who are you?" "I was Subject 7 Alpha," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Part of a Black Ops program called the Wraith Protocol. We were orphans, taken young, trained to be ghosts. No fingerprints, no records, no mercy." Julian felt a chill run through him. He had heard rumors of the Wraith Protocol government assassins used for jobs too dirty for the CIA. He thought it was a myth. "I escaped 2 years ago," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I killed my handler. I burned my file. I ran. I thought I could be normal. I thought I could just serve coffee and watch people live their lives." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "I didn't want this, Julian. I didn't want to bring this into your world." Julian reached out his hand, hovering near her shoulder. "You didn't bring it. It found us." "No." She shook her head, pulling back. "You don't understand. The men in the tunnel. They weren't just mercenaries hired by your rivals. The way they moved, the tactical coordination. They were using Wraith tactics." She unbuttoned the top of her blouse, pulling the collar aside to reveal her left shoulder. Julian drew a sharp breath. There, branded into her skin, was a scar. Not a jagged wound from a knife, but a surgical burn. A barcode. It had been partially burned off, slashed through with a knife in an attempt to remove it, leaving a mangled, ugly keloid scar. "They found me," she whispered. "Or they found you and realized I was nearby. Either way, Silas is coming." "Silas, my replacement. The one they sent to finish the job." The room fell silent. The weight of her confession hung between them. She was a weapon that had gone rogue, and now the government wanted their property back. Julian looked at the scar, then at her face. He should be terrified. He should throw her out to save his own empire. The smart business move was to cut ties. But Julian Moretti hadn't become the king of Chicago by being safe. He stepped forward, closing the gap. He reached out and gently touched the scar on her shoulder. His fingers were warm against her cold skin. "You are not a subject," Julian said, his voice low and fierce. "And you are not a weapon." Leo looked at him, stunned by the tenderness in his touch. "I'm a killer, Julian. That's all I know." "So am I," Julian murmured, stepping closer until he could smell the rain and gunpowder on her skin. "We are both monsters, Leo. But monsters protect their own." He cupped her face in his hands. The intensity in his blue eyes made her knees weak. "Let Silas come," Julian vowed. "Let the whole damn government come. They want a war. I'll give them a war. But nobody touches you again." For the first time in her life, Leo didn't feel like a fugitive. She didn't feel like a target. She leaned into his touch, a single tear escaping her eye. "Why?" she breathed. "Why would you risk everything for a waitress?" Julian brushed the tear away with his thumb. "Because," he whispered, leaning his forehead against hers, "you're the only person who has ever looked at me and seen the man, not the money." The moment was electric. The distance between them vanished. Julian kissed her, not a gentle, tentative kiss, but a desperate, claiming thing. It was a seal of a blood pact, a promise that if they went down, they would go down together. Leo kissed him back, pouring all her fear and rage into it. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. There was only the safe house, the rain against the windows, and the man who had just declared war on the world for her. Night fell over Chicago like a shroud. In the safe house, the lights were off. Leo and Julian sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by weapons. Julian had opened the hidden armory behind the bookshelf. They were cleaning guns. The rhythmic click-clack of slides and magazines was the only sound. "They'll come at 3 a.m., Leo said, checking the sight on a sniper rifle. "Human circadian rhythm is at its lowest. It's standard doctrine." "We have 4 hours, Julian said, loading a magazine into a custom Glock. "Marcus is stable. I called in a cleanup crew to watch the perimeter, but I told them to stay back. I don't want my men walking into a slaughter." "Smart," Leo nodded. "Wraiths eat standard mob enforcers for breakfast." She looked at Julian. He had discarded his ruined suit jacket and was wearing a black tactical vest over his dress shirt. He looked out of place, yet perfectly at home. "You handle yourself well," Leo noted. "For a real estate developer." Julian smirked. "My father believed in holistic education, classical literature in the morning, marksmanship in the afternoon." He handed her a fresh magazine. "So this Silas, what's his weakness?" "He doesn't have one," Leo said grimly. "He's a sociopath. He doesn't feel pain. He doesn't feel fear. He just completes the objective." "Everyone has a weakness," Julian corrected. "His is arrogance. He thinks he's hunting a rabbit. He doesn't know the rabbit has fangs." 2:58 a.m. The streetlights outside the loft blinked out. "Here we go," Leo whispered. She racked the bolt of her rifle. "They cut the power." "Night vision?" Julian asked, putting on a pair of thermal goggles he'd pulled from the stash. "Check." They moved to opposite sides of the room. The plan was a fatal funnel. Let them breach the door, then catch them in a crossfire. 3:00 a.m. A soft thump on the roof, then another on the fire escape. They were coordinating a dual breach. The front door didn't explode. It dissolved. A quiet, acidic hiss melted the lock, and the door swung open silently. 2 figures in full black tactical gear, night vision goggles glowing green, glided into the room. They moved like smoke. Leo waited. She was crouched behind the kitchen island, her breathing shallow. She needed them to commit. The first figure raised a hand, signaling clear. "Now!" Leo stood up and fired. The sound of the high-caliber rifle was deafening in the enclosed space. The first figure took a round to the chest plate. The armor held the bullet, but the kinetic energy knocked him off his feet, cracking ribs. "Contact front!" the second figure shouted, a distorted, digitized voice. Julian popped up from behind the leather couch. He fired 3 rounds, aiming for the gaps in the armor, the neck, the thighs. The second figure went down, clutching his leg. But then the windows shattered. 3 more operatives, swung in on repelling lines crashing through the glass. Flashbang grenades rolled across the floor. Bang! A blinding white light filled the room, followed by an ear-splitting ring. Julian fell back, blinded. "I can't see." Leo, who had squeezed her eyes shut the moment she saw the canister, was the only thing standing between Julian and death. She abandoned her rifle and drew 2 karambit knives from her belt. She sprinted into the white haze. She was a whirlwind of violence. She intercepted the first repeller before he could unclip from his line. She slashed his rope, sending him crashing into the wall, then spun and drove the knife into the weak point of his armpit armor. The second operative swung his rifle at her head. She ducked, swept his legs, and as he fell, she utilized his momentum to throw him into the third man. It was brutal, close-quarters combat. Bones snapped. Knives sparked against ceramic plating. Julian, blinking the spots from his vision, saw a blur of motion. Leo was fighting 3 men at once. She was losing ground. A heavy boot caught her in the stomach, sending her flying back into the kitchen counter. She collapsed, gasping for air. One of the operatives, the leader, stepped forward. He wasn't wearing a helmet. He wore a sleek, half-face mask. "Hello, 7, a cold, metallic voice said. "Silas." He raised a suppressed pistol aiming directly at Leo's head. "The director sends his regards." Leo looked up, blood trickling from her mouth. She couldn't reach her weapon. Silas tightened his finger on the trigger. Crack! Silas's hand exploded in a mist of red. He screamed, dropping the gun, clutching his mangled stump. Julian stood by the couch, his vision still blurry, his hand steady on his customized heavy pistol. "Get away from my wife," Julian snarled. He hadn't proposed. They weren't married. But in that moment, the title was a claim of ownership so absolute that even Silas paused. Leo seized the moment. She lunged forward, grabbing Silas's dropped gun with her left hand, and fired 2 shots into the chest of the operative standing behind him. Silas, wounded and realizing the tactical advantage was lost, threw a smoke grenade at his feet. "Fall back! Fall back!" The remaining operatives dragged their wounded comrades toward the window. Silas looked at Leo through the smoke, his eyes filled with a promise of future violence. "This isn't over, 7, he hissed. "We will burn this whole city to get you." Then he vanished into the night. Leo stayed on the floor, gun pointed at the broken window, until the sound of the extraction van screeching away faded into the distance. Only then did she drop the gun. Julian rushed to her side. "Leo, are you hit?" She checked her vest. 3 impacts, bruised ribs definitely, but no penetration. "I'm okay," she wheezed. "I'm okay." She looked at Julian. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his expensive tactical vest torn, but he looked alive. He looked victorious. "You called me your wife," she said, a hysterical giggle bubbling up in her throat. Julian helped her sit up, pulling her into his arms. "It sounded better than waitress, didn't it?" He looked around the destroyed loft. His safe house was ruined. His lieutenant was injured. A government hit squad was hunting them. But Julian Moretti smiled. "They ran," he said. "The ghosts ran." "They'll be back," Leo warned, "with more men, with air support. Julian, we can't stay in Chicago. We have to disappear." Julian stood up, pulling Leo with him. He walked to the window and looked out at the burning city skyline. "No," Julian said, his voice hardening into steel. "We don't run. Running is for prey." He turned to her, his face illuminated by the distant city lights. "We are going to bring the fight to them. You know where their headquarters is, don't you? Leo hesitated, then nodded slowly. The aviary. It's a black site in Virginia. Good, Julian said. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number. Who are you calling? The Russians, Julian said calmly. And the triads. And the cartel. What? I'm calling in every favor I'm owed. Julian said, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying ambition. I'm going to unite the 5 families. We're going to build an army, Leo. And then... He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. Then we are going to burn the aviary to the ground. The aviary was not on any map. Located deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, it looked like a logging facility from the air. On the ground, it was a fortress of concrete and steel, buried 3 stories underground, guarded by the most advanced automated defense systems the U.S. black budget could buy. It was impenetrable, or so the director thought. But the director had never anticipated a siege led by the combined forces of the American underworld. November 14th, 1:00 a.m. The forest surrounding the aviary was silent. Inside the command center, the director, a cold, sterile man named Adrian Cross, sipped his tea. He watched the perimeter monitors. Status? Cross asked. Quiet, sir. Silas is undergoing surgery. He'll be back in the field in a week, a technician replied. And the retrieval of Subject 7. We are tracking the Moretti vehicles. They seem to be fleeing towards the Canadian border. Cross smiled. Predictable. Suddenly, the lights in the command center flickered red. A siren began to wail. Massive energy surge detected on the perimeter grid. What is it? An EMP? No, sir. It's trucks. On the main screen, a camera feed showed the main gate. It wasn't a stealth team. It was a convoy. 6 reinforced bulldozers, modified with inches of steel plating, roared out of the tree line. Behind them, a fleet of black SUVs, motorcycles, and armored vans stretched for a mile. Julian Moretti hadn't just called the 5 families. He had called everyone. The Russian Bratva provided the heavy machinery. The triads provided the cyber warfare unit that was currently frying the aviary's communications. The Mexican cartels provided the sheer volume of firepower. At the front of the phalanx stood a lone, black muscle car. Inside, Julian gripped the steering wheel. Leo sat beside him, checking the load on a grenade launcher. You actually did it, Leo said, looking at the army behind them. You united the wolves. I told them the truth, Julian said, his eyes fixed on the gate. That the program doesn't just hunt ghosts, it hunts power, and if they take you, they'll come for their empires next. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. He looked at her, ready to finish this together, she said. Julian keyed the radio. All units, burn it down. The bulldozers smashed into the electrified gates. The night exploded. The battle for the aviary was chaos incarnate. It wasn't a surgical strike. It was a riot. Thousands of tracers lit up the sky. The program's elite guards, trained for silence and precision, were overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the criminal assault. While the main force drew the fire at the gates, Julian and Leo slipped into a ventilation shaft on the eastern ridge, a weakness Leo remembered from her days as a captive. They moved through the ducts, dropping into the sub-basement. The air here was sterile, smelling of ozone and bleach, the smell of her nightmares. Level 3, Leo whispered, raising her rifle. Cross will be in the central hub. They moved fast. Leo was a blur of efficiency, silencing guards with suppressed shots before they could raise an alarm. Julian covered her flank, his movements sharper, more lethal than ever before. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He was a warrior fighting for his heart. They breached the command center doors with a shaped charge. Boom! Smoke filled the room. Julian and Leo stormed in, weapons raised. Technicians scrambled under desks. But standing in the center of the room behind a wall of bulletproof glass was Director Cross. He looked calm. He pressed a button on his console. "Welcome home, Seven," his voice boomed over the speakers. "And Mr. Moretti, I must admit I underestimated your networking skills." "Open the glass, Cross," Julian yelled, aiming at the partition. "It's over." "Is it?" Cross smiled. "The National Guard is 10 minutes away. You've started a war on American soil. You can't win. Even if you kill me, you'll spend the rest of your short lives in a black site darker than this one." "We're not planning on living," Leo said, stepping forward. She pulled a small device from her vest. A detonator. Cross's eyes widened. "What is that?" "While your firewall was busy fighting the Triad hackers," Leo said, her voice cold, "I uploaded a worm into your cooling system. The nuclear reactor powering this facility is currently in thermal runaway." "You're bluffing," Cross stammered. "You'd kill everyone, yourself included." "I told you," Leo said, her finger hovering over the button. "I'm a ghost. Ghosts are already dead." She looked at Julian. He didn't flinch. He nodded. He knew the plan. "Goodbye, Adrian," Leo said. She pressed the button. Not to detonate the reactor that was the bluff. She pressed the button to unlock the facility's containment protocols. The heavy blast doors behind Cross hissed open, and from the shadows emerged the other subjects, the failures. The ones Cross had kept in cages for experiments. Twisted, broken, rage-filled living weapons. Cross turned around, screaming, as his own creations descended upon him. "Let's go!" Julian grabbed Leo's hand. They sprinted out of the command center as the facility descended into anarchy. The alarms were screaming critical failure. They fought their way back to the surface. The battle outside was waning. The criminal army was retreating, melting back into the shadows before the military arrived. Julian and Leo reached the edge of the forest. A helicopter, a black, unmarked bird piloted by Marcus, was waiting. They jumped in as the bird lifted off. Below them, the aviary was consumed by flames. The symbol of Leo's oppression was burning to ash. Leo watched it burn her head, resting on Julian's shoulder. She was covered in soot, blood, and bruises. She had never looked more beautiful. "Where do we go now?" she asked softly. "The world thinks we died in there." Julian pulled a file from his jacket. Passports. New names. "Tahiti," Julian suggested. "I hear the real estate market is quiet there." Leo laughed, a genuine, free sound that rose above the roar of the rotors. "I don't care about the real estate," she said, kissing him, "just as long as they need a waitress." Julian smiled, tightening his arm around her. "I think, the Mafia boss said, I can pull a few strings." The helicopter banked into the sunrise, carrying the ghost and the king away from the darkness and into a life that was finally truly their own. And that is the story of Leo Vance and Julian Moretti. What started as a simple robbery in a Chicago lounge became a war that shook the foundations of the underworld. It forces us to ask a question. When we look at the people serving us our coffee or walking past us on the street, do we really know who they are? Leo spent her life trying to be invisible, thinking her scars made her unlovable. Julian spent his life building a fortress of power, thinking he didn't need anyone. But in the end, it wasn't the guns or the money that saved them. It was the willingness to burn down the world for the one person who understood their darkness, They found freedom not by running away, but by standing together when the whole world turned against them.